So on Friday, Super Mario 3D All-Stars finally released, and it's receiving favorable reviews. Generally speaking, the consensus is that it's a good collection that could have been much better with a little extra polish. Now, I picked up my copy and I'm enjoying the collection myself, and I hope you are all as well. Now, there's been some discussion about the collection, whether it would have been better suited as a native port versus the emulation that's being used in the game. Now, of course, Nintendo owns the source code to all three of these games in this collection. So many people believe that if it was a native port, for example, with Super Mario 64, then we would have seen a lot better output as far as features, that we would have seen things like 60 frames per second and widescreen mode. This is something that has been well talked about and well documented over the last week on online forums, Twitter, social media, as well as many publications, media publications discussing this. And look, I do agree that there probably was a couple of things that they could have done to make the Super Mario 64 just run at like parity with the homebrew equivalent that's already out there. Now, we reported earlier this week that Super Mario 3D All-Stars on the Switch is indeed using emulation. Now, this is something that was confirmed by Oatmeal Dome on Twitter, and all three games were developed by Nerd, or Nintendo Europe Research and Development Division, and I think many people were left confused at why emulation was being used and why Nerd had gone down this road. And, you know, it's easy to criticize Nintendo for being lazy or, you know, doing this for a quick and dirty cash grab. But I think, you know, there's definitely more to this story that I want to talk about. Now, as we saw on Wednesday, there was an additional data mine that clearly shows that Nintendo 64 is running emulation and uses Lua scripts. And I know that I said LUA in my previous video, and a lot of people called me out for it. It's using Lua scripts to patch in certain textures, fonts, and other things to kind of modernize the game, and I think it's a pretty clever approach that they've used. And over on the GameCube for Mario Sunshine, it's using a custom emulator that was built by Nerd known as Haji. At least the code name is known as Haji based on the configuration files we've seen, and that runs Mario Sunshine. And for Super Mario Galaxy, there is a hybrid native code and emulation approach that is being utilized, which is quite interesting. And, you know, I definitely want to hear more about that. Hopefully we'll get some more discoveries and insights onto how that works. Now, yesterday on Twitter, once again, Oatmeal Dome, who's been pretty much on top of the data mining of Super Mario 3D All-Stars pretty much since the initial discoveries last week, found that for the GameCube and Wii emulators, it's implementing additional GPU features that aren't used by Super Mario Sunshine but are for other games that are native to the Nintendo GameCube. And the two features in question are bounding box emulation, which is something that is used in Paper Mario Thousand Year Door. Now, essentially what this GPU feature does, it basically lets the game know how large a 3D model is and where it should be placed on the screen. Now, it sounds really simple, like a real simple feature to implement via emulation, but in reality, it's actually quite tricky, and without it, it causes graphical glitches. And, you know, there is a write-up on the Dolphin emulators page that walks through what the bounding box emulation is, or what bounding box is, and how the Dolphin team managed to implement it in the Dolphin emulator, and how it was ultimately correctly emulated. Now, this doesn't sound like a big deal, but, you know, the question is, well, why is bounding box emulation an option in the emulation configuration, especially when Mario 3D All-Stars or Super Mario Sunshine doesn't use bounding box emulation at all? As well as this, there is another GPU feature known as Z-Freeze or Z-Freeze, depending on which part of the world you're in. Now, for this one, Z-Freeze is used in some sports games, notably Super Mario Strikers. So if you have two polygons that are very similar in Z value, you have that phenomenon known as Z-fighting, where it kind of flickers because the polygons are kind of blending in and out of each other. And that's what's known as Z-fighting. Now, Z-Freeze is a feature in the Nintendo GameCube's GPU that attempts to solve this. Essentially what it does, it freezes the depth value so it doesn't shift around, and it solves the Z-fighting problem. Now again, it doesn't sound like a very complex thing to emulate. The reality is Z-freeze is a very important feature, and in fact some games won't render correctly without it being implemented. So this is another feature that has been discovered in the Nintendo Switch configuration for Super Mario All-Stars 3D, notably Super Mario Sunshine. Now, given the inclusion of these two GPU features in the emulation layer, while right now there is no proof of anything, and I want to be very clear that, this is just speculation, it does kind of suggest, though, that the reason why Nerd decided to build an emulation layer for Mario 3D All-Stars rather than just port code is not because it's a lazy port, but because they wanted to build an emulation layer that is reusable, and they want to use it for up-and-coming titles. Now, of course, this is just my speculation, and I want to be very clear, but the cost and time to port older games would be significant versus applying an emulation layer just to other games. So what I mean by that is, let's say they use original source code to port Super Mario Sunshine, and let's say that whole project took 12 months from start to finish. Now let's say next year they want to make a port of The Legend of Zelda, let's say the Twilight Princess for the Nintendo GameCube over to the Nintendo Switch. And again, I'm just speculating. If they use the original source code to port, it would take a significant amount of time. Now that Nerd has essentially built a fairly configurable GameCube emulation layer, what that means is they can bring more GameCube titles over and get them up and running at a much faster pace than they would if they were just doing straight ports one-to-one and then adding, remastered or HD textures, or just, modernizing the game to make it run on the Switch. So I think Nerd has done this specifically for this reason, and I think we will start to see more of these older games from the Nintendo 64, the GameCube, and the Nintendo Wii start to come over to the Nintendo Switch. Now, I do think that the Nintendo Switch Online functionality is probably going to continue to be limited with just NES, Super NES, and potentially the addition of Game Boy and maybe Game Boy Advance, but I don't particularly see Nintendo 64 games coming to the Nintendo Switch Online. I think the emulation layer that Nerd has developed is going to be utilized for game-specific enhancements and game-specific remasters to the Nintendo Switch. And look, I definitely understand and respect what Nerd has done. And look, I will be one of the people that was a little surprised and confused initially when I first heard that they were using emulation, because initially it's just easier to say, well, they were just being lazy, and if they had more time, maybe they could have done a better job. But I think ultimately they've gone down the right path, and it really opens up the door for older games to be remastered and running on, the Nintendo Switch. And all of a sudden, we've got a library of Nintendo 64, Nintendo GameCube, and Nintendo Wii, and starting to speculate what games we can possibly see come to the Nintendo Switch is quite exciting. And obviously, the obvious choices would be The Legend of Zelda next year with its 35th anniversary. There could be some expectations that we'll see a similar collection come to the Nintendo Switch, and if that's the case, then I would suspect that they would draw on the same emulation layer that has been built for the Mario 3D All-Stars collection and giving it a very similar treatment. Now, hopefully, if they go down that path, then let's see some more enhancements being added, and let's see some really cool extras being added to the collection. But I think ultimately Nerd has done the right thing by everyone, and I think they've really come to the table with a really flexible and the right solution for this. And look, again, I want to be very clear that initially I was not sure if this was the right approach, but the more that I read into this and dig into this and hear about what data miners have found with Super Mario 3D All-Stars Collection, I do believe that Nerd has gone down the right path, and I'm quietly confident that we will see more Nintendo 64, Nintendo GameCube, and Nintendo Wii remasters coming to the Nintendo Switch over the next couple of years. And I think that's pretty exciting. And, you know, all of a sudden now I start to think about what is possible. And, you know, there's so many different possibilities that could come here, and it's really fun to speculate what they will be. But I do think that it will start with The Legend of Zelda next year. So there are my thoughts on the latest discoveries of the emulation layer found in Super Mario 3D All-Stars. I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think Nintendo has up its sleeve? What do you think is possible here as far as what comes next? I definitely think this is not a one-off thing. This is definitely something that will be reused going forward, and I'm very excited to hear what you guys have to say on this. But for now, guys, I'm going to leave it here. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, leave me a thumbs up, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye for now.